The cry from beneath the ruins, the wind was dry, full of dust, and it whispered like ghosts over the broken stones of the old world. Callan, a human salvager, stepped carefully through the remains of what once had been a beautiful city. Now it was just ruined, silent, cracked, lifeless. His boots crunched on shattered tiles, and his scanner beeped softly in his hand. There was no treasure here, no weapons, no technology worth taking. Still, something made him stay. Something deep inside told him not to leave yet. The planet was forgotten, marked as dead after a war that ended centuries ago. Nobody came here, not even looters, but Callan. He liked silence, he liked secrets, and today, he was about to uncover the biggest one of his life as he moved closer to a fallen archway. His foot slipped, slightly loose stones shifted under him. He knelt down, brushing the dirt aside with his gloves. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint, it could have been the wind. Help! Callan froze, heart racing. He looked around. There was no one there. Again, the sound came, barely more than a breath. Please. This time, it was clearer. It came from under the rubble, beneath the cracked floor of a fallen temple. Callan dropped to his knees and began digging with his bare hands. Stone by stone, piece by piece, he tore into the collapsed structure. Like a man possessed, after an hour, sweat ran down his face. His hands were bleeding, but then he saw it, a small opening, dark and deep, like a cave hidden under the ruins. And inside it, he saw eyes, two glowing eyes, wide and terrified, stared up at him. It's okay, Callan said softly, trying not to scare her. I'm here to help you. The girl didn't speak. She was small, barely more than a child, her skin pale silver, her hair tangled and long. Chains hung from her arms, her dress torn and dirty. She looked like a forgotten ghost from another time. Carefully, Callan reached in and broke the chains. With his laser cutter, when he pulled her out, she didn't fight, didn't even cry. She just collapsed into his arms like a broken doll. How long were you down there? He whispered. Holding her close, she shivered in his arms and whispered a single word. Cold. That one word stabbed straight into Callan's chest. She wasn't a ghost. She was alive. Someone had buried her there, chained and alone. She was nothing. He wrapped her in his jacket, gently brushing dirt from her face. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips dry and cracked, but her eyes still shone like twin stars, full of fear and something else, hope. Who did this to you? He asked, but she only closed her eyes and leaned into him. Callan stood up, holding her close, and looked back at the ruin. This wasn't just old stone. This was a grave someone made for a living child. He looked up at the sky, then at the silent land around him. Something terrible had happened here. And this girl was the last piece of that story. But now, the story wasn't over, because he had found her. And that meant someone else might be looking to Dotanesk. The girl who should not exist. The hum of the ship's engines was soft, like a distant song. Callan sat in his pilot seat, but his eyes kept drifting back to the sleeping girl in the medical pod. Behind him, she was wrapped in blankets now, her small form still shaking sometimes. Even in sleep, the onboard AI had scanned her for injuries, but what it found shocked even Callan. Genetic signature, royal lineage, Veltheran dynasty. Status, extinct. Callan leaned back, stunned. The Veltheran dynasty had ruled half the galaxy nearly 1,000 years ago. Their empire had fallen in a massive civil war and had vanished from history. The records said the entire bloodline had been wiped out, every last royal dead. But the girl he just pulled from the ruins was one of them. Is this a mistake? Callan whispered, tapping the console again. The AI confirmed, 99.7% match. Subject carries the full royal DNA line. He looked over at hers, so small. So fragile and yet carrying the blood of a lost empire. Her body bore strange marks, not just scars from chains. Symbols were burned into her skin, symbols of rejection, banishment, and one that looked like a seal, a royal seal, once used to mark traitors within the palace. Why would they bury their own royal child like that? He asked himself, but deep down he already knew the answer. She was never meant to be found. Suddenly, a soft sound broke his thoughts. She stirred in the medical bed, eyes opening slowly, pupils adjusting to the light. When she saw him, she flinched and tried to sit up, fear flashing across her face. "Hey, it's okay," Callan said quickly, walking over with hands raised. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." The girl looked around, confused. Then gripped the blanket tightly. Her voice was dry, almost cracked. "Where am I?" "My ship," Callan replied gently, kneeling beside her. "I found you." "In the ruins." The girl stared at him for a long time, as if trying to understand his words. Then she looked down at her own hands. "They left me there. They told me I would die alone." "Who?" Callan asked softly. "My family," she whispered, her voice full of pain. "They said I was cursed. I was a danger to the bloodline. So they buried me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She had cried enough in that cold grave. Now, her tears had run dry. Callan felt something twist inside his chest. He couldn't imagine the loneliness, the fear, the slow hunger of being trapped alive under stone. But she had survived, somehow. She had survived it all. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused, then whispered. "Velia." Callan nodded. "Velia? I'm Callan. You're safe now." She looked at him again, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're a human, yes?" He smiled. "Is that bad?" She blinked, then shook her head slowly. "No, but you just don't smell like a liar." That made him chuckle. Despite everything, she tilted her head. Confused by his laughter, it was probably the first time she had ever seen someone smile. "Without cruelty behind it, I don't know what to do now," Velia admitted. "There's no one left. I don't even know what year it is." Callan sighed. "It's a long time since your world fell. The galaxy moved on, Velia, but you're not alone anymore." For a moment, the room was quiet. Then she said something strange. "They told me I would bring the end of the stars. But all I ever wanted was to see one." Callan stood up, walked over to the main window, and pressed a button. The dark panels opened, and outside, the stars lit up the black sky like diamonds. Velia gasped and stood slowly, walking barefoot across the room. She touched the glass, eyes wide, filled with wonder and sadness. "So many stars," she whispered. Callan stood beside her. "They're still here. And now, so are you." Velia turned to him, tears falling now, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Velia sat quietly in the corner of the ship's lounge, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes watching every shadow. She didn't speak much. She didn't eat much. She didn't even blink often, like she was afraid the moment she did, she'd be back in that dark hole under the ruins again. Callan moved carefully around her. Like approaching a wounded animal, he cooked a simple broth, hot, light, and easy to swallow, and placed the bowl beside her. Then he stepped back, giving her space. Velia stared at it like it was a trap. "You don't have to eat if you're not ready," Callan said softly. "I'll just keep making food till something smells good enough." Her eyes flicked to his. Confused, why didn't he force her? Why didn't he yell, or call her names, or throw the food at her feet? She waited a full 5 minutes before reaching out slowly, hands shaking, and lifting the bowl. She drank the broth with both hands, slurping, like someone who hadn't eaten real food in a long, long time. Then she froze, eyes wide. I didn't say thank you, she whispered in panic, like she'd broken a rule. Callan blinked, surprised. You don't need to thank me, Valia. You needed food, so I gave it to you. She lowered the bowl slowly and asked in a tiny voice. But, what do you want from me? Callan sat on the floor across from her, keeping his tone calm. Nothing. I just want you to get better. Velia stared at him like that sentence didn't make sense in her world. No one helps for free. She whispered, not even servants. They help because they fear the whip. Callan shook his head. Then they were never truly helping. And those who forced them were never worthy. Her lips trembled, but no words came. Instead, she wiped her mouth and placed the empty bowl neatly beside her, then curled into herself again. Callan didn't push her. He just stood, gave her a blanket, and left her alone. Later that night, he found her outside the engine bay, curled up, shivering softly, even though the room was warm. Valia, you don't have to sleep on the floor, he said gently. She looked up with tired eyes. But the floor is safe. High beds can fall. Chains were always low. He paused, then knelt beside her. There are no chains here. No one is going to hurt you. Ever again. Valia's hands tightened around the blanket. You promise? I swear it, Callan said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away. She just closed her eyes and leaned into the touch. Slowly, her body stopped shaking, and she fell asleep like that. It was the first time she had ever felt warmth from a hand that didn't hurt her. The next morning, Callan woke up early and checked the nav systems. The galaxy was big, full of powerful people who might still hate what Velia represented. Even though her empire had died long ago, politics didn't forget. And neither did enemies. As he worked, he heard small footsteps. Velia entered the room, eyes still heavy from sleep, her hair a tangled mess. She looked at him, then at the 2 cups of warm drink he had made, one for her, one for him. Can I sit with you? She asked. Callan smiled and nodded. Of course. They sat together in silence, sipping the warm drink. It was a small thing, nothing flashy. No dramatic music, but to Velia, it meant everything. She wasn't chained, she wasn't watched, she wasn't hurt, she was seen. And that was more than she had ever hoped for. I had a dream, she said quietly. In the dream, I was flying, but not alone. There was someone holding my hand. I think it was you, Callan chuckled softly. If it was a good dream, then I hope it was me. Gosh. She smiled, just a little, not wide, not loud, but soft and honest. Gosh. A smile from someone who had forgotten how to smile. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, what is kindness, really? Is it just being nice? Callan thought for a moment, then answered, kindness is when you care, even when you don't have to. It's when someone's pain matters to you, even if they're a stranger. Valia looked down at her cup, silent for a moment, then, you're the first person who's ever shown me kindness. She didn't say anything else. She just reached out and placed her small hand gently over his. No fear, no flinching. Just quiet trust. And in that moment, Callan knew he wasn't just saving her. She was changing him, too. Callan had seen scars before. Soldiers had them. Survivors wore them, but the mark on Valia's back wasn't just a scar, it was a symbol. And symbols carried meaning. Meaning that could shake entire empires. He first noticed it while gently cleaning a wound on her shoulder. Velia had winced, but didn't stop him. Then, as he lifted her tunic slightly to check the bruises, he saw it burned deep into her back, across her spine, a circle, with a broken star in the middle. Surrounded by royal script, but the star had a slash through it, a mark of rejection, of shame, a mark not meant for slaves. But for traitors of royal bloodline, Callan stepped back, heart pounding. What is this, Velia? He asked softly, not wanting to frighten her. Velia froze, then slowly turned her head away. "I didn't want you to see that," she whispered. "You don't have to be afraid," Callan said gently. "But I need to understand. What does it mean?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, voice trembling, "They called me the curse-born princess." Callan waited, listening, not interrupting. "I was born during an eclipse," she said. "The same day, a palace tower collapsed and killed 3 high nobles. The priest said it was a bad omen. That I was the reason." She looked down at her hands. "They said I would bring ruin to our world. My parents wanted to hide me at first, but the elders insisted. So they branded me and locked me away." Callan felt anger rising in his chest. She was just a baby, he thought, and they did that to her. "I was never given a crown," Velia continued, "never allowed to learn the royal tongue. I grew up in a quiet tower with no mirrors, no friends. Just silence, until the war," Callan gasped. She nodded slowly. "When the war came, my family fled. But they didn't take me. They left me behind, saying the curse must not leave the soil." She paused, breathing hard. "Then soldiers came. They locked me in that temple, said I would sleep until the stars forgot me." Callan swallowed hard, his fists clenched. He had seen cruelty before, but this was something else. Velia had been erased, not just from records, but from memory, and yet she survived. And now she sat before him, hurt, but not broken. He stood and gently placed a hand over the mark on her back. She flinched at first, but didn't move away. "I don't care what that scar says," Callan whispered. "You're not a curse. You're a miracle." Velia's shoulders shook, and tears rolled down her cheeks. She didn't speak, but she leaned into his touch like a child who had long forgotten what safety felt like. Later that night, Callan pulled up his ship's database and typed in the ancient symbols from her scar. He cross-referenced them with ancient galactic history archives. And there it was, hidden in a forbidden archive. Velthara Protocol 66b. Any royal born under eclipse is to be branded and sealed. If rebellion arises, they are to be terminated or buried beneath sacred ground, never to return. Callan leaned back in shock. The ruling class had feared her birth so much, they wrote it into law. This wasn't just exile. It was erasure by design. Velia was supposed to be the end of the old world, and they had tried to stop that at any cost. Suddenly, the console blinked. Incoming ping from unknown satellite array. Encrypted message detected. Callan's eyes narrowed. Someone out there was watching, and somehow they knew she had awakened. He rushed to Velia's room. She was sitting at the window again, watching the stars, her arms wrapped around herself. "I saw a shooting star," she said softly. "I made a wish." "What did you wish for?" Callan asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She looked over her shoulder and smiled faintly. "That you won't give me back when they come for me?" His chest tightened. He sat beside her and gently said, "No one's taking you. Not while I breathe." She nodded, but deep down, they both knew something was coming. The truth was no longer buried, and truth always brings shadows with it. The stars outside Callan's ship blinked like distant eyes, watching from the darkness. But one star didn't blink, it moved fast and toward them. Callan leaned forward in his pilot's seat as the scanner beeped sharply, "Unregistered vessel. Approaching, no transponder code, silent mode active," the ship's AI warned. His jaw tightened. Someone had found them, and they weren't sending greetings. He quickly dimmed the lights and shut down all non-essential systems. "Velia," he called softly, walking toward her quarters. She was awake, sitting on the bed, her eyes already full of worry. "They're here, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Callan nodded. "We can't run. Their ship's faster. But we can hide." For now, Velia stood up, trembling. I don't want you to get hurt. You didn't ask for this," Callan said firmly. I chose to help. I'd choose it again. She opened her mouth to speak, but a loud thud echoed through the ship. Both of them froze. Someone had boarded. The emergency lights turned red. Casting a glow across the hallway, Callan grabbed a plasma pistol and turned. To Valia Hyde, don't come out, no matter what. She nodded and ran into a hidden compartment he'd built for storing rare items now. It was her only safety. Footsteps echoed in the hall, quiet but sure. A shadow moved past the door, then stopped. A black-suited figure stepped in towel. Armored face, hidden behind a reflective mask. No name, no insignia, just a long blade in one hand, and a silent scanner in the other. Callan raised his weapon. "You're trespassing." The figure tilted its head, then said in a cold voice, "Return the girl." "You have no idea what she is." "I know enough," Callan growled. "She's a person. That's all I need to know." The figure didn't answer. It just lunged. Callan fired once. Twice energy blasts lit the room. The figure moved fast. Blade clashing against the walls, cutting through a table like paper. Callan ducked, rolled. Fired again, the figure stumbled, sparks flashing from its chest armor, but it kept coming, until suddenly it stopped, because someone else stood. Behind it, Velia, she had come out. Holding an old staff one that belonged to her ancestors, its crystal glowed, reacting to her touch. The figure turned but too late. A burst of light slammed into him, throwing the armored intruder into the wall with a violent crack. He slumped, unconscious, sparks rising from his suit. Callan stood in shock. "Where did you?" "How did you, Velia?" Dropped the staff and ran to him. "I couldn't stay hidden." "Not when you were in danger. You could have been hurt." Callan whispered. "I'd rather be hurt," she said, "than lose the only person who ever made me feel safe." He held her tightly, heart still racing. The threat was real. Now this wasn't just about hiding a girl. This was about protecting someone they were still afraid of. They locked the intruder in a stasis chamber and scanned his ship. Inside was a single message, short and chilling. "Eliminate the Curseborn. No witnesses." Callan's blood ran cold. This wasn't bounty hunting. It was royal cleansing, still active, even after centuries. Velia stood beside him. Reading the words on the screen, she didn't cry this time. She just whispered, "Vel. Never stop, will they?" "No," Callan said, "but neither will I." The next morning, he adjusted the ship's heading. "We're going to a place called Talos Fringe," he said. "No central law, lots of caves, old tech hand, a few friends." "Who owe me favors? Will it be safe?" She asked. "Safe enough to think," he replied, "and maybe fight back." Valia looked out at the stars. She had spent most of her life buried and forgotten. Now someone hunted her like she was dangerous. And yet, the one person who knew, her the one human, never looked at her with fear. Only kindness. She touched the scar on her back, then looked at Callan. "What if I stop running?" she asked. "What if I stop hiding?" He met her eyes. "Then I'll stand beside you." Velia nodded. The galaxy had called her a curse, but maybe, just maybe, she could become hope instead. Asterisk, the Talos Fringe wasn't. A planet Teat was a field of floating rocks, shattered moons, and old stations built into asteroids. Hidden, lawless, full of dangers. But to Callan, it was the only place left to hide. He docked his ship in the shadow of a forgotten mining station. No one asked questions here. As long as you had something to trade, you were welcome. And Callan had tech, lots of it. But what he didn't have was peace. Valia walked beside him, hood over her head, her eyes sharp. Watching everything, she was no longer the frightened girl he pulled from the dirt. But she was still learning how to live without chains. She still flinched at loud noises. Still froze when someone stared too long, yet every day she grew stronger. In the safety of the ship's workshop, Velia sat quietly. Watching Callan repair a damaged drone, the soft glow of tools lit his hands, and his face looked tired but calm. She tilted her head and asked, "Why do you keep helping me?" He didn't look up, just smiled faintly, "Because you needed it." She paused, her voice small, "But others needed help too, right? And you didn't risk your life for them?" Callan stopped working, turned toward her. "I've helped many people, Valia, but none of them were thrown away like you were. Buried like trash just for being born. When I found you, it wasn't just about helping. It felt like I was meant to." Valia's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said she was meant for anything except destruction. She stepped forward slowly. "You were the first person who cared if I died," she said, "and that's why I don't want you to." That night, Callan left to speak with an old contacted trader named Breck, who owed him favors. Velia stayed behind on the ship, but something felt wrong, a strange buzzing in her chest. Like a whisper in her bones, she stepped outside the ship, walking slowly along the metal walkway of the docking platform. Then she saw him. Callan, surrounded. 3 bounty hunters had him cornered against a wall, weapons drawn, one already bloody from a scuffle. Callan fought hard, but he was outnumbered, outgunned, and already injured. Valia didn't think she ran. One hunter raised his blade, aiming for Callan's chest before it could land. A sudden blast of violet energy struck him, sending him flying. The others turned. Shocked, Velia stood at the end of the corridor, her hand glowing, eyes burning bright with power she didn't understand, but it had awoken. Because she felt his pain. The hunters hesitated, but one lunged forward. Velia didn't move. She didn't need to. The very air around her shimmered, and a pulse of energy erupted from her skin. The metal walls cracked, sparks flew, and both hunters were slammed against the bulkhead. Unconscious, Callan fell to one knee, breathing hard, blood dripping from his side. Velia rushed to him, knelt beside him, her voice shaking. I didn't know I could do that." Callan smiled, even through the pain. "Well, remind me never to make you angry." Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I was cursed. I thought I could only destroy. But today, I protected someone." Callan touched her cheek. "You saved me." Velia lowered her head onto his chest, whispering through tears, "You were the first to care. And now, I'll never let you be hurt again." Back on the ship, Callan rested while Velia treated his wounds carefully, her hands gentle, her eyes focused. She didn't shake, didn't panic. She was calm, like someone who had chosen her path. Now, after wrapping his ribs, she looked at him and asked, "If they keep coming, will you still protect me?" Callan met her gaze. "As long as I live." Velia nodded slowly, then whispered, "Then I'll protect you too, with everything I am." For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden. She didn't feel like a curse. She felt like a partner, and maybe, just maybe, something more. Far above them, hidden satellites tracked the burst of ancient royal energy. On a forgotten throne world, old powers stirred. They now knew the Curseborn had awakened, and she wasn't hiding anymore. The stars above Talos' fringe burned brighter than ever before, but deep within one of its ancient moons, a gate opened. A signal carried by energy not felt in centuries had awakened something powerful, and now they were coming inside. Callan's ship Velia stood in front of the mirror for the first time. Not the mirror of glass, but a mirror of truth. She looked at herself not as the cursed child buried in ruins, but as someone worth saving, someone who had saved in return. She had traded silence for speech, fear for courage. She still carried the scar on her back, but now it felt like a badge, not a wound. It was part of her, but no longer the whole story behind her. Callan approached, still bandaged but healing fast. "You okay?" he asked gently. Valia nodded, her voice calm. They're coming, Callan, aren't they? He didn't lie. Yes. I picked up movement from deep space. A fleet, silent, old codes. They're coming for you. For me, she repeated softly, then turned to him. Then it's time I stopped hiding. They met in the central chamber of the mining station, an old dome, long forgotten. Full of cracked glass and rusted metal, Callan had called in a few trusted allies, but most had already heard the rumor, the curse-born. Princess lives, and she has returned. Ships began landing across the moon, not bounty hunters, but descendants of the old royal guards, secret believers, old exiles. They had waited for generations for the day the seal would break. Now they stood in silence. Staring at her, Velia walked into the chamber slowly. No crown, no dress, no guards, just a simple robe and soft steps. The chamber fell into a deep stillness till one voice broke it. You bear the seal of the broken star. You were cast away. Why should we kneel? Everyone looked at Velia. She didn't raise her voice, didn't use power. She just said softly, I was called a curse, but I learned kindness from a human with no crown and no army. He gave me food. When I had nothing, he protected me when I was hunted. He told me I mattered when all I had ever heard was that I didn't. So if I must rise now, I will only do so if he rises with me. She turned and held out her hand to Callan. He froze. Shocked. I'm no royal, he whispered. She smiled. No, you're better. He stepped forward, slowly, uncertain, then took her hand. At that moment, the old lights above them flared, ancient systems recognizing the royal blood and activating. The dome lit up with 1,000 points of light, and across the chamber, one by one, they knelt. But not to power, not to bloodline. They knelt to the girl who had risen from dirt and chains. To the girl who had chosen kindness over vengeance. To the princess who brought hope back, not with force, but with love. Later, Callan stood beside her as she looked out at the stars from the throne platform. It wasn't a throne of gold or a gemset, was cracked stone, shaped like a crescent moon. Velia placed her palm on the surface, and it lit up. Beneath her hand, accepting her, the systems will recognize you now. One of the old advisors said, You are the last true heir. Velia nodded, but then turned to Callan. Let the galaxy hear this, she said aloud. My first order is not war. 'Tis not revenge. It is thanks. She turned to Callan and spoke softly for all to hear. For saving me, for feeding me, for protecting me. I name you my heart's guardian, my equal, my chosen. Callan blinked, stunned. Wait, what does that mean exactly? The advisor chuckled. It means she just made you the second most powerful person in the system. And possibly her husband, if she says the next word. Velia smiled, cheeks glowing faintly. She leaned closer and whispered, Not yet, but maybe someday. Callan laughed, shaking his head. From grave to crown, he muttered, What a ride. She smiled softly. No. From kindness to kingdom. Somewhere across the stars, old enemies saw the signal light and trembled. The forgotten child had returned, and she wasn't alone. She had a human by her side, and together they would change everything.